Welcome back to the Winner's Circle, everybody. Today I am here with Rakesh. He's going to talk to us about AI and how to kind of recode the world. And he is part of Publicis Sapient. They are the makers of Sapient Slingshot, this tool that helps us do really cool things with development. And they are the latest AI Excellence Award winner. Rakesh, welcome to the Winner's Circle and congratulations on the award.
Thanks, Russ. Thanks for having us here.
Absolutely. Now, before we get started in all the cool stuff you're doing, give us a little bit of background about Publicis Sapient and maybe a little bit about Slingshot and how you got started building it.
We started off as a company helping companies adopt internet, right? Like that was the transformation trigger. And over years, the transformation triggers changed, but like transformation remained a constant, right? Like first it was internet, then it was e-commerce, then it was mobile, then it was cloud, and now AI is the latest transformation trigger. And people have always used us as a tip of the spear to enable transformation of their organizations in order to make themselves relevant and competing in the new world which we are doing. So our latest trigger right now is AI. And that is what we are helping companies use AI in agentic transformation, which is again at the end of the day, it is transformation of their processes and company.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me because we have been in all these different kind of transformations. And I read the nomination. What's really cool about this is Sapient Slingshot really started from kind of an internal tool that you built, I think.
Yes.
How does a tool you made for internal use become a product that now is kind of modernizing enterprises at scale?
Yeah. Uh, Internally, when we first saw the ChatGPT movement in November 2022, right, like obviously everyone wanted to get hands on it. But we as a company, we work with a lot of clients. So we can't risk putting the client's information into a public tool and adapt to a startup at that time. No one was sure about how your data is going to be used. Later, people found out that people were training using the data, etc., and all that. So right at the start, we wanted to let our people know the power of the chat gpt platform and what it enables so that like we can see what value we can create for the customers, but we were equally aware of the risks which were involved in it, right? How can you put customer data? How are you going to use it? How are you going to actually, if people are using it, we also need to know how people are using it so that we can create real value and the real processes behind it. So internally, we built something called PS Chat, right? Like I whipped up something. Well, now it's called vibe coding, but like at that time, I think back in March, right after November, in March, we basically quickly put up a company portal. We negotiated a deal with OpenAI so that like they don't use our data for training, and we got indemnity clauses, etc. All those good stuff, and we were able to release like a chat gpt kind of clone for internal users, right? Like that is how it started. So when we released it to the internal users, I could immediately see that there's benefit of people writing applications on top of it. So we created an API layer, right? We created an API layer, and some people in our organization use those API layer to create the first Visual Studio plugin. This is back in 2023 April, right? Like long before cursors, cloud codes, and none of those things existed at that time. Yes, GitHub was there. GitHub was doing only code completion at that time. They didn't have a Copilot extension, but people were seeing that okay, they're going to PS Chat, typing something, they're copying the code and putting it in Visual Studio. Then we said that okay, if you have the API layer, I can do it all from Visual Studio directly, right? Like that is how it started. um, that was the beginnings of the Slingshot product, right? Like
Now, you guys are really focused in, or the nomination was focused in kind of what I call is, legacy technical debt. And it's really something that almost every telecom provider, every technology provider, pretty much every enterprise has, which is some sort of system that's sitting in the back doing its job, but it was developed 20, 30 years ago or 10 or whatever under applications that are, either defunct or have, kind of been modernized. If you give us a kind of an executive summary, kind of that Slingshot technical debt problem, give us a little bit of that and tell us a little bit about what you're doing with Slingshot.
yeah. So again, when we started using AI and when we had this PS Chat and Slingshot interfaces, we had one of the customer reach out to us saying that, look, I have millions of lines of COBOL code. but we don't know. We want to modernize it to use AI, right? Like they wanted to add AI features to it, but they are not able to add it because the code was in COBOL, and like from COBOL calling other AI services, like it was a heavy lift, right? So they said like, okay, can you help us understand what this code's business rules are so that we can implement in the new system, and can you use AI to do that? So we use that API layer, what we talked about, and we basically said that, okay, fine, so we have the APIs to the AI, so why don't we automate the process what a human does, whereas takes a chunk of code, pastes it in a prompt and asks what does this code do, and then quickly we realize that at that time the context limit was only 4,000 tokens, right? Like if you remember, right? It was we have million tokens, but it was 4,000 tokens there. So then we realized quickly that we needed a system to intelligently break large pieces of code and tie the context and create a coherent picture, right? Like, so we basically said, okay, how do we break the code, right? Like breaking code is not just, at that time chunking was like you just take chunks of file. It works for text documents, but code documents, you can't break it in middle of the function. You can't break it in the middle of the word or something like that. Everything breaks. So what we started doing is, okay, we needed intelligent chunking. So we wrote parsers which can break the code into sections, like which are like limited to 4,000 tokens or something. And then we built a layer to tie all the chunks together, create a coherent map. And we built a context where at the time we didn't even know that it was called context, but we were building a context layer, right? We were building an intelligent context layer, and this tool became our legacy modernization platform, right? When we solved the whole process, how we did it is we wrote the whole process on a board, right? Saying that, okay, if I was a COBOL expert, and how will I modernize this, right? um, what will a human do? And we looked at all the processes and then introduced which and all parts we can use AI to do it. How can we automate it? What are the constraints for the AI to do that? So we broke down the whole process. We basically wrote a system, and we were able to use that very successfully to understand the business rules in a 20,000 screen COBOL application, right? Like, um, and obviously the next question the client asks is, this is awesome, right? Like I now understand what my system is doing, which no single human understood before. Now can you extend that pipeline to actually create a new application, right? Like in the new stack, right? So initially we did code to specification part of it, and then we extended that thing to from specification to code, right? And then we had the full life cycle. We could go from COBOL code to Java code, right, all the way, right? And the next obvious thing which people like, once they do it, they obviously want more, right? Like, so they looked at it and say, oh, this is great, but can I introduce my new requirements before you generate the code? Then we introduced a step between spec and spec to code called spec modification or spec enhancement, which basically allows you to enhance the specification, add new stories or add new functionalities. So this whole platform, as we sort of did, as we started doing it, we learned a lot of lessons of what happens in a system. And what we realized is, like, the others in the market were trying to do the same thing, but they did a brute force approach, and we were more successful. Their brute force approach was like they were skipping all the middle steps and say, let us go from code to code. Right? In theory, it seems like a great thing, but it never works. And that is what we learned it organically, and that is why our platform, even today, right, like more than 1.5 years later, right, like when they pit us, most of the clients give us, because there are multiple options, they basically do a POC phase. Invariably in the POC phase, the quality of output what we produce comes on the top, right? The reason why is because we went from the first principles approach of looking at the whole process and then fitting the AI, not taking the AI first approach and then going back, right? So that was the to answer is a long answer to your question,
Yeah.
but that is
Well,
that
the
is
the COBOL problem has been a problem for decades. We were talking about this earlier. COBOL almost suffers from that kind of first mover's advantage in the software world. It's decades old, but it was one of the first platforms really to help businesses automate and really kind of move into that modern kind of computerized era. And it was quickly overpassed by a million other languages, but that knowledge, all of that programming was still baked in, and now we don't really have those people around. They're all retired or on to other things. Why do you think it took so long for, this, decades long, wait to get at this? Why didn't somebody kind of build, a JavaScript COBOL translator back in the day?
Two reasons, right? The first reason, which I heard from my previous companies and my previous jobs, is if it is not broke, don't touch it. Right? That was one of the reasons. It was working reliably for like a decade or more, right? In most of the organizations. And if it is not causing you a problem, there is no reason to touch it, right? That was one of the reasons. And then the question comes, why now? Right? Why now is basically the software systems are evolving faster than ever now. Right? So as I told you, right, now, if you have a COBOL system, which is, let us say, a green screen, which is accepting a user application, right? Like people expect now to have some AI-enabled features, like an intent detection of the user, like a fraud detection, or like ability for user to sort of like run some agents before you sort of submit the things, etc. Now, in order to introduce these features, which has almost become an expectation, you can't do it with the old screen, right? Like your business will look outdated if you are using older things without having AI features in your application. And that is what is forcing the companies to say, okay, now is the time we need to modernize, because they can't modernize a COBOL application and add these features. They need to first move the stack and then do it. And now another reason why they are touching right now is now they are getting increasingly confident that AI is actually able to understand code better than any human can explain to me. So that is another reason, right? Like AI is like with 98% probability, it is able to tell better than even the original coder. Like, because I can tell you as a software programmer, right? Like if you wrote a program and if you ask me after 2 years, I will not be able to explain in that detail as what AI can explain the same program to me right now, right? Because AI can keep the whole program in the context and it can actually give you a better description than maybe my skills of describing are not that good as the skills of programming, right? So
Yeah. Now you mentioned context a lot, and I think the real kind of core differentiator here is that you guys built this enterprise context graph that has all the kind of details about the software and kind of how it relates. Give us a little kind of background on what it is, and why does giving AI a map of the system before it acts, why does that change everything?
yeah. So context, as you know, is basically a set of information, like a reference which you give to your AI model, saying that, okay, use this as a reference, not just use your trained data, but use this additional context and then answer my question, right? Like that is the basic definition of context, what you sort of paste in your prompt or your system prompt or whatever it is. Now that is quickly limited by the model window which you have, right? Like you can't paste too much context. So people have built RAG systems, like so that like you can retrieve the context and then paste, but after retrieving, you're still pasting it into the context window, right? You still have the limitations of context window, but at least you are able to query something. What we quickly realized is when I did the software, as I talked to you about the legacy modernization, right? Like we went all the way from the old code into new code with the new stories being introduced. What we realized was the AI world is very siloed. There were a lot of tools for individual phases separately, right? Like for coders have Visual Studio plugins or whatever coding agent which they are using, right? The product managers had their own tools embedded into maybe their Jira or Atlassian ecosystem, right? The designers, Figma and others had their own AI tools inside that, right? Your strategy people might be using ChatGPT or like whatever it is. What was being is that the context was getting recreated every time, or they are reusing pieces and chunks of context, but they're all in silos. So as a developer, I see a story saying that, okay, we need to add a Google Pay button to the e-commerce cart. Like let us say that is the specification of the story. um, AI will basically say what is the context it requires, how to connect to Google Pay, what I need to do. Okay, maybe some context on what are the test cases, what are the frameworks I'm using in this library, and use it. Right. That is all what I call it as local context. That is not enterprise context. The real context is why am I adding the pay button, right? Like right, like because that context was there by the product manager when he created the story. The product manager said that, okay, I'm using a Google Pay because this set of maybe Gen Z audience prefer Google Pay over credit card. That is the reason why I want to add it. So the context is okay. If the audience is Gen Z, maybe the Google Pay button should be the default button, and then the credit card becomes later. That is more context. A good developer will do that, right? Um, and the context is okay, it has to always work in this particular scenarios, because that was the hypothesis. The hypothesis context is not there for the coder, because coder is just pulling a story context or something like that. Something has to tie what was the context used while creating the story, what was the context used by the developer while writing the code, what was the context the tester used while testing the story, and what is the context which is required when you saw a production defect. Now all these things have to be tied, right? And that tying across the enterprise different phases is what we call enterprise context. So that it is not context islands, but this context are like a graph which is ties your enterprise process. So your AI processes, when they are working in any particular node of that processes, have access to the context graph of what happened before, which makes it intelligent. Humans indirectly have it, right? Like, so we don't write it, but that's what makes a good team member from a bad team member. The guy who has context is able to sort of do things more appropriate, right?
Yeah, and I've seen it time and time again of exactly that context layer, especially with developers, is if they're not involved in that conversation for building a product, for understanding a product, then they can't build that context around it. And so it was really important in my kind of career growing up and building products, of making sure that you had that team member in so that they understood all of that. And
Exactly.
you're right, without that context, you're really flying blind, and when something comes up, you just don't know what to do as a developer, I would imagine. You're like, well, do they want this or that? They didn't tell me. And because
Exactly.
we always leave something out as product managers, right?
And that is
Um,
why you call developers to a user experience meeting, you call developers to a product discussion, right? Or you get them to go on the field and experience how the users are. That is building context.
yeah, and it's that expertise layer of, I understand what this is doing, and AI really doesn't have that. It can guess, and I've seen it myself a million times. You describe Slingshot as kind of that GPS for modernization. What goes wrong with AI when you don't have that kind of map?
See, when you don't have that map, one common problem which everyone knows is hallucination, right? As you said, right? Because it has to fill the gaps of missing context, it basically hallucinates. Actually, when it's a very bad, sometimes I feel sorry for AI when we say it's hallucinating, but it is doing its best to fill the gaps because you have not given it the right context, right? So it is your job to fill the context in order to do that. And the GPS is the same thing, right? Like, why do we rely on GPS? There are many roads to go to the same destination. Which road do you take, right? So that is why we sort of colloquially refer to as GPS, right? Like, so there's multiple ways to modernize. Which path will you choose, right? Like, why did you sort of choose a particular path? Because of the wider knowledge of the spec and the context and the provenance of the code, and where the code has come from, you need to do a particular decision, right? That is why it is called the GPS of modernization. It is not just about reaching the destination, that is code to code. It is about how you reach the destination. What is the spec you generated? What is the acceptance criteria you generated? And that determine how did you write the code so that it can be tested for that code. Because you can have a code which is working, but if it cannot be tested, I call it like a wheel which you can't take out. What will you do when you have a puncture, right? Like, um, so you need to have ability to build robust systems, to build one of the ways we test Slingshot. Like, there are so many coding agents, right? People ask like, okay, what makes it yours better? I can do the same thing with others. Yes, you can do the same thing, but that is not the criteria. We use an LLM judge and say how maintainable is the coding agent thing there, because that determines, because that is the problem we are solving. Why are we modernizing things? Because they are not maintainable. So if you produce new code which is not maintainable, you are making another problem for the future, right? Like, so how maintainable your problem? Another feature which we have patented, which is very interesting, you will appreciate that, is we call it a provenance feature, right? Like, we applied for a patent, it is right now in the process. Provenance feature is when a person uses a coding agent and changes the code, we have markers at every line level which says that whether this line was written by human or it was written by AI. If it is written by AI, what was the context used by the AI when it was written, what model it was used, right? Now that's very important. Lots of people, I ask them, open your code base and tell what parts were written by AI, right? That is really important, because tomorrow if you have a problem or if you have an audit requirement, especially for large banks and insurance firms and medical firms and all, this will quickly become a problem, right? And we built that into the system from day one, whether we have modernized the code and why it was modernized, which it is there, or if a human basically prompted and generated the code, who generated, when they generated, what AI model was used. So tomorrow, like how you have product recall, someone basically says this product basically had a thank God it didn't happen. But tomorrow, if someone mentions that it had a security issue and all the code generated by this code has to be revoked, what will you revoke?
Yeah, I imagine that's extremely important, especially as we go
Yeah,
forward.
and then
Uh,
and people are not thinking about it too much, right? Like there's a
no.
liability concern for companies if they can't tell which was AI generated and which was human generated.
Well, and you guys have a lot of customers in kind of regulated environments. I know you're big into healthcare and finance, and so you guys have built this kind of governance layer into the platform. What does that mean in practice for your clients?
So for clients, we can firstly the two parts. Even before we go into the governance and the audit part of it, very simple management is right now not possible, because right now CIOs are spending money on all these coding tools. They can't even tell like if people have used the coding tools for their vibe coding projects or their actual projects, right? Like, because I can't look at the code and tell whether this code was generated using the tool which you bought, right? So the only way they can measure is, okay, I'll only measure saying that whether you're doing more work, but that is not a good measure, right? Like if I was the CIO, I will want to know how much of my code which was checked in was generated by an agent, right? And when it was generated by agent, like what are the tools which were used? That's the next level, right? Like people are using MCP tools right now, like left and right. What tools were used? Right, what context was used, what documents was used, right, when it was done, what was the prompt, was this prompt in a shared prompt which the whole team is using, right? Things like that, right? Like if initially first is to just get the visibility, the traceability, and what we call it as AI assisted agile, where we said that in agile there used to be a principle saying that working code over documentation, right? Which is a very famous statement where everyone stopped documenting after that. But we basically said that, okay, we need to evolve thing. I said explainable code over working code, right? It's the next level. Documentation is easy to create right now. I can create the spec from any AI tool, right? So it's okay, you don't write documentation, I can ask AI to explain it, it'll explain it. But the whole point is explainability is not just about the what the code does, why the code was written, right? When was it written, why it was written, what prompt generated this code, right? Like, so explainability of code, when AI is generating 80 to 90% of the code, explainability becomes really important.
Well, and I imagine that's where, if the hallucinations happen and errors happen, you go back to that context layer
Exactly.
and
And
start to
you can fix it.
understand it. Yeah. Now, in the healthcare cases, you guys have been modernizing these COBOL screens, without the need to pull the old COBOL programmers off the golf course and out of the retirement homes. How did you kind of operationalize that?
Yeah. So I will not say that without pulling the people from the golf courses, without pulling more people, right? Like, because what happens is we made it scalable, right? Like, so because there are, like, if there are millions and millions lines of code, right? What we did is we enabled to have like one expert able to verify the specs, the structure, what it is generating, the sampling of what it is doing, so that like we still have a human in the loop verify it, but we didn't need to have like we didn't need 50 experts. One person could do 50%'s job, because the AI followed the structure, the specification, the acceptance criteria, and the relationships. And if there are any learnings, if that one person said, it could be very quickly incorporated and regenerated the whole thing, right? So it is faster to sort of take the learnings and also make sure that it is applied everywhere. um, so it is not completely eliminating human, it is using humans where they are really add most value and scaling their value. That is how I'll put it.
Yeah, it's getting that expertise and
Yeah,
making it.
and how do you
Yeah,
take this
and
expertise and weave it back into your process and make it repeatable? One of the biggest problem with expertise is it is not replicatable. So the problem which we try to solve is take the expert's knowledge and make it a self-improving, continuous process and repeatable.
yeah. Now you guys are looking at these older systems, these 20, 30-year-old systems and rebuilding them in what seems like an astounding amount of time, in days. How is that even possible? You've got, millions lines of code and I mean, how is that possible?
So two things, right? Because see, agents can be parallelized. So the moment you have an agent doing it, see, most of the process, if you see in modernization, is a repetitive process. Like if there is a class, if the class functionality has to follow a certain design pattern and get implemented in a different language, now you need to do that pattern maybe 1,000 times across the code base. Now you can do all the 1,000 parallel rather than sequentially, right? Like that is where you get the speed from. And second thing is in terms of consistency, right? Like it is easy with AI to uh, verify the consistency, and if something is wrong, ask it to redoing the work is a lot faster, right? So you can iterate multiple times, right? And you can parallelize things, right? Like if you put both of them together, what seems like a large amount of work can be compressed into a short time.
Well, I imagine if I was your customer, you come to me and I've got this problem of, hey, this thing's been in there for 25 years, and Bob, the developer, is gone. We have zero documentation. When you tell them that we'll have this done in a week or a few days, what's their initial reaction, and what's their reaction after those few days?
See, obviously it is disbelief. Obviously, like they're like, okay, why should we trust you? So our standard thing is, okay, let us take a small module and show it can be done, right? So we generally do a POC phase, and what we do is we keep something constant so that it's measurable. Like for example, if the application is, most of the applications write to a database, right? Like when they do some transaction or read from a database, so we'll say that, okay, we'll not touch the database layer firstly. We'll just change the application layer and to show that it is the same behavior. Or we'll replicate the database, create a test copy of the database. We'll write the new process running parallelly to it, writing the data, and say you compare the data. If the operation results in the same data in both the databases, right? That means like we have replicated it exactly the same, right? Like that, we also have a patent process called DBRE, right? Like it's like a how you measure the business results and the business logic of making sure that you have done this right thing. How do you measure the old system versus new system and compare them, right? So we have multiple techniques we developed over what you can say multiple engagements. We apply all of them and we give them those options, saying that, okay, which option convinces you most, or like which you will trust it more. Even if a human is doing, how will you verify, right? Like we start from that. Then when they say this is how we verify, and say, okay, we can replicate that.
Well, let's walk through that a little bit, because these are enterprise systems that are in charge of our finances, in charge of our health. Um, in my experience, that you get into these AI kind of modernizations. I've been working on it a little bit on my programs. Um, there are these hallucinations that happen, but then there are beyond hallucinations when the AI is just confidently wrong. They're sticking by their guns. This is the way to do it. How do you build trust with clients whose system just simply can't afford that?
Yeah. So see, two things, right? Like when you ask AI for an opinion, that is when you get this. But if you tell AI a guardrail saying that, okay, it has to pass this test case, there is no way for it to be confidently wrong. It can't confidently say, I'll not pass this test case. Either it will say, I can, or I failed, right? So what we do is like the whole test driven strategy. What is your constraints you put on the system? What are the guardrails you put on the system? And what is the verification and evaluation loops you put on that, right? And those things have to be deterministic. If you're like, you don't need your AI process to be deterministic. You need your evaluations and your tests to be deterministic, and you need to be sure about that, right? Like for example, the example which I gave you, right? Like a particular use case will result in a database structure in a particular way. You can't change that. That is the end result, because other systems depend upon that data, right? So you can't change that. We can write tests for all the edge cases for that and say this test suite has to pass no matter what code you generate. If the test suite doesn't pass, then you are right, you need to redo it again.
Yeah. Now, if I'm a CTO, I'm one of your clients or a soon to be client, and I'm sitting on all of this deprioritized legacy debt. What's the first kind of internal conversation that I need to have with my team to kind of get ready for a modernization or even to start thinking about it?
Two things, right? Firstly, most of the companies, they already see the power of it, because most of the companies where we have sort of actually engaged it, they already had some internal thing, because people could see the thing that, yeah, I can actually, because people were already trying it. They were taking the old code base and asking AI, saying that explain it to me. So there were already internal pilots going on in order to use AI to understand the code or to test the code or to sort of modify small chunks of it, that were already happening. What we sort of, when we go there, we tell them how we did it at scale, right? Like, yes, one thing is to do POCs and like experiment and convince yourself that so most of the people are already convinced that AI can do it. What they are really stuck at a CIO level is, how do I do it at scale? Yes, my team has showed me that they can do it for one file, two files, but I have 3 million lines of code,
Well,
right?
and I imagine, they start like I did, they open up ChatGPT and say,
Yeah, exactly.
develop me this.
Yeah.
And you've got Copilot, Cursor, and millions of other platforms now. What does Slingshot do that none of them can, and why does that matter?
Uh, as already talked about, I refer to some of them, right? Like one of the things is like the provenance feature. I have not seen that in any one of the tools which you mentioned, right? Like because the reason why like they have not implemented is, firstly, they are like focusing only on the engineer. Secondly, what we are doing is tying the context across all phases of SDLC, right? Like, so because as a company, we call it a SPEED acronym: strategy, product, engineering, experience, and data, right? Like, so we used to operate, because when you want to transform a company, one of our earlier things before AI was like there was handoff problems. Like, there used to be a strategy consulting firm, then there used to be a design agency, then there's a development company, and then there's a maintenance company. Everyone used to blame everyone else, but like the problem is your transformation is not done, right? Like, it doesn't matter whose problem is it, right? So we basically have all the capabilities, and we used to do end-to-end transformation. See, we used to measure ourselves saying that final outcome is transformation. It doesn't matter who succeeds in, like, there's no point in engineering succeeding or like the strategy succeeding, right? Everyone has to succeed. So when we did that, when AI came in and everyone was using their AI tools to do that, we found the same problem, right? Again, we are creating silos and saying that my AI tool is working, but it didn't solve the problem. Right. So
Right.
what we said is we need to tie all of them, right? Like, so the biggest learning for us is, if you don't tie the context, that is a feature which other tools don't have, because they all operate in a single space. We are trying with, so Slingshot is actually a platform, and it has multiple tools. Like, we have Visual Studio plugin, we have a Jira plugin, we have like a what you can say, a tool, a backlog manager tool, we have a legacy modernization tool, and we have a sustain.ai tool. So these are all the tools working on the same platform, which is powered by an enterprise context graph. So now you can understand, right? Like, the platform versus tool differentiation, that is our biggest differentiator, and we built for enterprise first use case. We didn't build for a consumer. Like, most of the tools are built for B2C kind of customers. When I say enterprise first, what you can ask me, what does that mean? That means, like, what are the governance procedures? What is the audit mechanism, right? Like, how, if you are using a tool, how do you ensure that the person who is calling the agent's context is passed to the tool also, so that like the tool is using the same authentication context, so that like the MCP tool is not accessing a database because right now and using someone else's credentials and giving you the data and putting it in your code, right? Like, so that is a serious security problem. So we need to we build this platform to respect the enterprise guidelines, to respect the enterprise governance procedures, to give explainability and traceability to companies, provide extension points, no lock-ins, so that like you can change the model providers you want, you can change the infrastructure that you want, you can choose to run your agents in your prem rather than running on the cloud, right? Like, so, and give the hybrid options. So that is our differentiators, right? Giving flexibility and enterprise control to Right now, agents are black box if you're running on a cloud, because you can't tell really what the agent did, whether the agent posted your data to some other place. There's no way to
Yeah.
tell that.
Now, you've been sitting in this role for a few years. You have massive experience of helping other companies with AI and some pretty big companies. I see this shift of everybody kind of using it as a task accelerator, a task manager. Do this, do that. You guys have really made it kind of this full lifecycle partner, and it's changing how teams work together. How does that look like? What does that look like from the inside as you're building and kind of managing this team?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? And this relates to the previous question also, right? One of the things what we built is, once you use a AI tool, this is something which I ask my partners when they sort of come in. I said, like, okay, you used XYZ tool. So who is your star developer, right? Like they'll say, oh, this person, does amazing work with this coding agent. I said, like, how is your the person sitting next to him benefiting? Right, they don't have an answer for that. They are like, oh no, he teaches them or he sends his prompts to them, right? Like, but I said, like, that's the manuals, what you can say, tedious way of doing it, right? Like, so I tell to CIOs saying that, okay, companies are built with teams. It is not about individuals, right? You need to raise the team, not an individual, right? Because if you raise an individual, you're making one link of the chain better. The same thing as my saying that, okay, your engineers are producing code faster, but your other SDLC is slow. How does it matter, right? So what we built into this is a hierarchical concept of, like, something like, I'll give you one example. We have something called a prompt library. Now, this prompt library, it can be maintained at a team level, at a product level, at an enterprise level, and at an industry level, or etc., something like that. And I'm, as an enterprise architect, I can set a guideline saying that, okay, I want every payment thing to be audited to this audit database. Now, as a team developer, I don't need to know about that. I basically say that I'm working on a payment project and I'm implementing this functionality to accept this payment. It immediately knows that guideline, and before it generates the code, it puts the audit logs, because that enterprise architect's guidelines take precedence, which get appended to his query, right? And a team lead might say, I want you to use log4j for logging, right? Like, that's the next level. Okay, you want me to log, the team lead said you need to use this library. The user actually wants to do this functionality. I'm now adding all three together. Now the whole team is benefiting. So someone is setting standards. Now you can see how it gets propagated, right? Um, so that is how an enterprise and a team benefits from having a collaborative context sharing, collaborative best practices sharing. And this is just not related to prompts. Prompts are the lowest level of sharing, but it applies to your context sharing. It applies to your the guidelines on the context. Who has access to what context? If you just ingest all of them into a vector database, there might be some sensitive financial algorithms. People can just ask the context and say, okay, tell me how this how our order let us say fraud check works. That's supposed not to be accessible to anyone, only to them, right? So you need to, when you ingest the enterprise context, there should be guardrails, which who has access to what context, right? And how can they use? You should be able to know the fraud interface guidelines so that you can call it in your program, but you should not know the algorithm, because that is sensitive, that's trade secret, maybe whatever it is, right? So things like that, you need a platform to enable that. Individual tools will not be able to do that, right? That is one of the ways where we help the teams collaborate better. And
Yeah, and I think as I talk to people, you see that a lot of this kind of disparate work going on that doesn't have that commonality layer or that context layer or that shared libraries that you're talking about, and you have all these guys kind of going off on their own trying to do things. And as this agentic world develops and matures, you've got to have that. What do you think this looks like in 5 years if we keep accelerating at this pace?
yeah, in 5 years, what I feel is, in addition to sharing the common context and all of this, it is also sharing behavior. See, when people talk about enterprise context, I tell them, right, like, the see, we already had data warehouses and data lakes and all. They have the enterprise data, right? Like, so what is difference between an enterprise context graph and a data warehouse and a data lake? Enterprise context primary thing is to create links of the data which is there in your data warehouse with behavioral links, right? Why is this behavior important? Is, if you want an agent to do the job of yours, right? Like, maybe you get an email, someone asking you saying that I want to sort of do a podcast. Um, you might say yes, you might say no, right? And that is captured because in the reply I can see whether you said yes or no. But I don't know why you said yes or why you know. That is there in your head, right? Like you don't really document, like every time you said no, you don't take another page and say I'll write it down why I said no or something like that, right? Now you can build agentic transformation where agent will basically go through. Initially it will be very simple. It will use historical data, which is basically like AI ML, and I'll say based on your previous behavior, I decided that you should decline this request and accept this. Right now, you will look at the data and say, no, 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 I want you to accept this also and decline this. Then the AI will ask you why, right? And you will give them some maybe one sentence feedback saying that no, I decided that I will not do any podcast anymore on ERP systems. I decided that I want to do some podcasts on AI transformation. It will remember that. So next time when the agent runs, it will do that. So it is capturing your behavioral data. And tomorrow you are not there. You are on vacation. Your assistant basically comes and says that okay, I'm not accepting this. Your AI will say that no, based on what Russ told me last time, he wants to do AI transformation work. You might want to consider like accepting this or at least check with Russ on that. That is behavioral capture, right? It is not just automation, it is behavioral capture. Now just scale this simple example at an enterprise level. Why was a supply chain order went through? Why was the merchandising rejected? Like why was this code review accepted when the functionality works, but still the architect basically asked me to rewrite this, right? Why was that bug occur even though acceptance criteria met? Now this is institutional knowledge, and you need to build upon that. One of the other issues you're talking about individual tools is they all talk about learning from their memory, but they're learning individuals behavior, they're not learning enterprise behavior. You need
Right.
to know, because the team people will come and go, you need to know how the team as a collective made decisions, and why was one product the product produced by one team is better than the product produced by other. Right now no one can explain it. They'll say they had better people, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Publicis has been at this a while. What do you see as the horizon, kind of for the next step of kind of the Slingshot tool?
See, as the name suggests, like slingshot is what we feel is, if you take the analogy of slingshot, it'll basically give you that acceleration to take on problems which we thought were like just people thought that we better not touch it because it was too hard or too complex, right? Like so, the legacy modernization. We never worked in COBOL before, right? Like as a company, we were always working on latest tech stacks and all those things. We were not like a scale company which used to manage COBOL, right? But that didn't stop us from now taking COBOL code and doing it. So what I think what it will enable Publicis Sapient is to really pursue our goal of transformation of companies without having the barriers of limitations of what can be done and what cannot be done. I think AI will enable us to reach the true transformation potential which we can offer to our clients.
Yeah, now you've been through all these transformations, from all, I remember that digital transformation, has been, thrown around for so long, of helping companies basically get online. you know, this is such a different beast, and you guys are doing such an amazing job at it. So I really thank you for all your time and all the success that you've had. Congratulations.
Thanks for your time. It was fun talking to you.